Okay, good morning. My name is John Waller, and I'm a partner and senior project director with Holterman Waller Strategy in Regina. And I'm moderating this morning's panel that's looking at the education and training side of innovation in the Saskatchewan agriculture sector. So today's panel, we have three innovation-focused education and business leaders in Saskatchewan. First, we have Tina Beaudry Mellor, Chief Economic Growth Officer for Economic Development Regina. And Tina is a former Saskatchewan cabinet member as well, and was responsible for three relevant areas to today's discussion: the Minister of Advanced Education, Minister responsible for Innovation Saskatchewan, and Minister responsible for the status of women. Second, we have Tavia Laliberte, Vice President of Academics at SIIT. Tavia is a key member of SIIT's senior leadership team, overseeing a variety of strategic projects, including the new SIIT Center for Innovation. Finally, we have Sean O'Connor, the head and managing director of Conexus Venture Capital, and a lead on Conexus's Emmertech fund. That's a nationally focused ag tech venture fund looking to stimulate the development of a global ag tech hub right here in Saskatchewan. So today's panel, we're going to focus on a variety of discussion areas related to ag innovation. And what we really hope to do is help Indigenous people and some of the Indigenous community leaders here gain an understanding of the knowledge, skills, and training that's going to be needed to participate in the future of ag innovation here in Saskatchewan. So the first discussion topic we have is really to just set the context for the discussion. And we're going to talk about ag sector investment overall. So I was going to start with Tina. And Tina, in your role with Economic Development Regina, what do you see as major ag sector development and some of the major investments going on in Saskatchewan that you think are really going to help drive the sector and drive new employment and training needs as we go forward?
Well, over the last number of months, there's been really an extraordinary number of investment announcements, particularly in the Greater Regina area, which would encompass most of the southern Saskatchewan and the Treaty 4 space, particularly in the value-added processing side. So both Cargill and the Viterra announcement are canola crushing announcements. And so what those two announcements aim to do is to take canola and to value add or create new products out of the canola seed. And so from that, you can create oil and meal. Meal can be used in protein isolate and also in feed for animal stock. The oil can be used obviously for canola oil for consumption, but also in biofuels production. And so we're seeing a lot of that. We've also had a pretty great announcement from Red Leaf Pulp, and relevant to this discussion because Red Leaf Pulp will take the straw waste from wheat straw and convert it into compostable packaging for products. And so a couple of the trends that we're seeing in and around the Regina area, firstly, we are located in the center of 80% of Canada's farmland. So a lot of people are attracted to this area and the logistics around it. And secondly, there's a real interest in making better use of the products that we're already growing and creating new products from them.
Yeah, great. And that really highlights, I think, some of the larger investment and new investment coming on stream here in Saskatchewan. So maybe just on that topic as well, some of the investments coming in or what we may see down the road. I'll maybe kick it over to you next, Sean. Anything to add to what Tina had mentioned, what you see in sort of macro or larger scale investments in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, I think there's two really interesting trends happening now. The first is the efforts that have been done at the national, provincial, and citywide scale here. For us to go from a province and an area that is largely focused on putting our efforts towards growing a crop and then getting it out of the country as fast as possible, to how can we add more value to that crop along the way as we're moving it out. The second, which is where I live and breathe, is what can we do from an innovation standpoint to help farmers from around the world grow their crops? What can we do to help improve supply chains around the world? And that's where we're seeing some really exciting developments right now in the space of technology. And that includes our fund, which we're significantly aided by our anchor investor in Innovation Saskatchewan, pushing Emmertech Fund 1 live, and we're thrilled to get that up and running. And we see a lot of opportunities to create companies here in Saskatchewan that create solutions that are on farm and million acres across the globe, and really that we can become a technology hub in the ag space using our combination of technical knowledge and strong agriculture background here.
Yeah, cool. And again, just thinking about maybe some of these investments that are helping stimulate a lot of this innovation and a lot of these new initiatives. Anything else from yourself, Tavia, that SIIT might be seeing, or just in some of your provincial roles you see as some of those investments and developments driving some of this?
I think just to make, first of all, thank you so much for including me. But just to add as we see these new investments and this shift and pivot in ag moving toward innovation and technology, as these new businesses are created, we want to make sure that there's a workforce that's skilled and prepared and innovated in themselves in order to make sure that we have the human resource capital to support these businesses. And Saskatchewan has a really robust, connected post-secondary system, whether it be primary research at the universities or applied research at SaskPoly and the other colleges in SIIT. I think it's an important piece that we kind of support this growth together to make sure that it's balanced and all the pieces are there for it to be successful.
Yeah, great, and certainly a focus for our panel today. So next discussion topic we wanted to move to is really on the technology side. So I'll start with you, Sean. And you had mentioned in your role with Emmertech and building this ag tech ecosystem, could you just describe for us how you see technology evolving agriculture, and maybe some comment on the types of training and the types of skills that are going to be required for future employment in the sector?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a tremendous shift towards automation, and the application of the Internet of Things on farm makes the future farm really exciting. The ability to implement kind of new precision farming tactics from technology is really interesting. I think that when you talk to anyone about the future of farming, we'd all kind of agree on what it looks like. We may have differing opinions on how long it takes to get there, but the idea of one day the farmer is out in the field and there's a whole bunch of machines driving around that he or she is running out to essentially work on the go as they have small issues that they need to troubleshoot. I think that's kind of where the farm's going to go over time. Like, we've done so much in the past, optimize over creating larger and larger combines and really optimizing around how do you get the most out of the person in the machine. And when you take the person out of the machine, you actually want to optimize around how do you minimize the downside of when the machine's not working or when it's not optimal. So that, in terms of what needs to get there, is really exciting to me. And I think that we would have a whole bunch of different opinions of whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years from now, but certainly feels like the direction that farming is going in the future. And it completely changes the skill set that's needed, both with respect to the skills on farm, really becoming a technologist. They already largely are. They have, the great combination of needing to take on a whole bunch of data through various platforms that they're using, relying still heavily on intuition, and then needing that kind of Saskatchewan or prairie-based fix it with duct tape mentality that I think makes our farmers here so unique. But as they move towards the future, certainly it's going to be a higher pressure on the data automation skills and using large amounts of information to make decisions, both with respect to how they're growing the crop, and then also all the steps that they're going to be integrated along the supply chain afterwards. We're really excited about the skills, though, because I do think we're going to see, over time, not necessarily a huge reduction of labor on the farm, but certainly a big shift in terms of different type of labor. But same thing will happen in terms of the companies that are creating those technologies. And I think that we can become the global hub here. So, looking at what is going to be required, certainly is going to need, a tech forward mindset. And that doesn't just mean computer software engineers. Like, I think that we over exaggerate how important that's going to be towards the future, but certainly, the mindset of a constant curiosity and a hunger to learn and ability to continue adapting is going to be critical for people who are in all factors of the agriculture supply chain. And I think where we see really big opportunities, though, is in creating ag tech companies here. So how do we get more people in Saskatchewan in the tech space broadly, but certainly applying the competitive advantage we have naturally as a province and creating more ag tech companies. And that's everything from software engineers to customer support to sales to marketing and really everything that's required to create a globally successful company.
Yeah, really good comments. And I think one of the things that you had mentioned that I might go to Tina on as a former member of cabinet was, with all the technology on the farm, what about infrastructure? I'm thinking specifically high-speed internet, that IT infrastructure out into the rural areas. I know that your government, your former government you worked with, put a lot of time and thought into that. Any comments maybe on the infrastructure side or more broadly on some of what Sean had said, Tina?
Yeah, so I attended Agritechnica, the world's largest ag tech conference in the world in 2019, and the major trends there were around precision agriculture. So, with respect to spraying, seeding, the major trends were around sensor technology. The major trends were around data management and analytics. And major trends around machinery and its sort of autonomous machinery. So, with those things in mind, all of those to some degree require digital infrastructure and certainly high speed and 5G digital infrastructure. What was interesting is that the major agricultural manufacturers are starting to create components of their machinery that are interoperable, which is a really good thing. But that connectivity piece is still lacking. And so a company, for example, like John Deere, was actually creating its own cell towers. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that in order for farmers and producers to be able to make full use of the technological components that are available to them. To speak to the skill speed piece, just very quickly, tech is going to change the agricultural industry in terms of being a lot more sustainable and environmentally friendly. Sean spoke about sort of the heavy machinery, but I think over time you're going to see the heavy machinery go away or certainly be reduced as we can use drones to spray and seed instead of using large scale sprayers and seeders and doing that in a very large way. And so you're going to see a major transformation in the use of machines. You're also going to see a major transformation in carbon emissions. We've already moved a lot in that area, but when you can spray only the weeds in your crop rather than the entire crop, you're reducing the amount pesticides that are eventually being consumed by human beings and the costs that go along with that. You're also reducing the need for a large machine that emits tons of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And so these are the things that are going to really transform agriculture. And in terms of skills, it's going to require we are going to require engineers and software developers, but that you're still going to have a need for agronomists, people who understand the soil, who understand climate, and who understand great growing conditions, in addition to some data analytics.
Yeah, excellent. A lot of change going on there with everything you described. Maybe I'll follow up with you as well, Tavia, and maybe specific with that SIIT lens with technology right in your name. How do you see the changes going on in agriculture maybe driving what SIIT and some of your other post-secondary partners doing in the agriculture sector?
There's two initiatives at SIIT that are just really jumping out at me right now. The first one, which has already been announced, is the Indigenous Center for Innovation. It's a partnership that we have with SDTC, so Sustainable Development Technologies Canada. And it's really about how do we ensure that Indigenous Canadians, Indigenous people here in Saskatchewan are a part of the innovation agenda and a part of the innovation solution. And I personally can easily be overwhelmed, when we talk about what the future is going to look like. And often I'm tasked with, what is the current state of Indigenous communities and Indigenous industry and Indigenous skills? And how do we make sure that Indigenous people are a part of that future? So this center really is about creating a foundation for that innovation ecosystem within our Indigenous sector. And it's still early days on the project. It certainly has started, but one of the initial investments that we've made is what we've called a maker lodge. And it's really a tinker space. It's a space where students and community members and faculty can come in, be exposed to technology, play with technology, think about technology, and sort of contemplate how technology might interest or solve some of the challenges that they see, whether in their lives or in their communities. So as an example, we have 3D printers. Most of our staff and students have never been exposed to 3D printers. And so as they're learning and seeing how they work, you can see the wheels start to rotate in their mind about, what could I do with this? How would this provide value in my life? And I got teased actually quite a bit because one of the first technologies we put in there was sewing machines. And I think that, many people think that sewing machines are a relatively dated technology, but I challenge anybody to try and thread a sewing machine and see how easy and non-technological sewing machines are. They're really challenging, and students have really been interested and really picked up the challenge to figure out these sewing machines and find value in what they might be able to create. So we're really excited about this innovation center. It's really about exposing Indigenous students and communities to technology and figuring out what our role might be around this innovation agenda. And then the second initiative that SIIT kind of has, it's not exactly out yet, but we're introducing an intro to Indigenous agriculture. And this particular program, it's a fairly short course, an applied certificate. So likely it'll end up being about 6 months at most in length. But it's really introducing agriculture to our Indigenous communities, or reintroducing, because obviously we are historically connected to the land. But it's often described as kind of an inch deep and a mile wide. So really a broad perspective on what the ag sector looks like here in Saskatchewan, and starting to get some exposure and leverage to connect Indigenous labor to ag here in Saskatchewan. So those are kind of two big things that we've got on the go at SIIT.
Yeah, excellent. And I think as you've walked us through some of what SIIT is doing, maybe I'll go back to you, Tina, to just based on some of your history. How do you see post-secondary institutions evolving here in Saskatchewan, maybe more broadly around ag, around innovation? Maybe any other comments or initiatives that you're aware of?
Yeah, so two things I would say here, and one Tavia is quite familiar with in her role at SHECAP, but one is the sort of debundling of program and the ability for in post-secondary institutions to provide micro credentials. So there are a lot of people out there who are not necessarily interested in a 4-year ag degree, but might be interested in learning how to use drone technology to spray their crops, or perhaps to just do asset management. And so you're seeing a move, particularly at the applied learning institutes, so SIIT and SAS Poly. They have applied programs. It makes it a little bit easier for them to do that. But in the post-secondary sector at Broad, there's really a move towards debundling programs. So the student has the ability to bundle together the things that they want to learn in a better way. And I think this breeds innovation, because you can have engineering students who might be interested in a fine arts class. And we know that innovation comes from those kind of interdisciplinary collisions of ideas. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I would say is that, obviously there's a renewed interest in agriculture. So Tavia talked about the program that's being offered at SIIT. There's a short course also in the Moose Jaw campus. And so there's a lot more appetite, I would say, over the last few years of working collaboratively with industry than there has been in the past. And I see this as incredibly important. And I guess there is a third thing, and that's this. It's the commercialization of research. So the University of Regina, Sask Polytech, SITs, they can all commercialize research and it to serve industry needs, and that's incredibly important in this space.
Yeah, excellent. I'll maybe kick right back to you, Tavia, follow up to Tina's comments around micro-credentialing, some of the flexibility we're seeing in post-secondary. I think SIIT and SaskPoly as well have always tried to design some of those flexible programs. Is there anything else you'd add specific maybe to agriculture or specific to innovation, either SIIT's doing or following up on what Tina said that you see more broadly in some of your provincial role?
Yeah, I mean, I think micro-credentials is definitely a big, innovation within the sector. And I think connected to the micro-credentials is not only, it's kind of just-in-time learning, like what are the skills that you need right now to meet the needs of whatever you're doing, whether it's your own business or you're an employer. But it's also about lifelong learning too. So, that trend moving in and out of post-secondary as well as employment, that there's not really this fine line of, okay, now I've completed my education, it's time for me to go to work. I mean, that's not what the future of education is going to be. And it's going to be, how do we make sure that those just-in-time skills, micro-credentials that you might be receiving today can build and add and lead to, whether it's future credit for different types of programming, or making sure that it kind of adds and complements what you might take for training in 2 years' time or 5 years' time. So it's a bit about the pathways piece, and not even just within one institution, but making sure that those microcredits are recognized across institutions. So if SIIT has a microcredential that's meeting your needs, and it might stack onto something that SaskPoly is doing. Yeah, it's a really important piece, I think, especially for ag.
Yeah, I think that I do some work with First Nation University as well, and I know they're focused on the executive education, as you mentioned, that lifelong learning piece. They do an Indigenous mapping program that looks at that traditional side, cultural side of lands. And so a lot of exciting things going on in the post-secondary world. But Sean, I thought I'd kick it over to you, maybe to speak to some of the non-traditional training paths, maybe some of the non-post-secondary paths. I think your experience in software, your experience in startups, it can often be a little bit different on the training side. Maybe comment on some of those non-traditional paths and how you see them aligning.
I would start with my idealistic views of the startup space is that, particularly at the youngest stages, when you're still a small team of 20, 30 people or less, it truly is and should act like a meritocracy. And it really is just based on the skills and the effort that you bring to the table. I lived and breathed this in my last company at Grow Technologies. One of our lead engineers, who started off as a junior engineer, was self-taught. And we had other engineers who came in from coding boot camps and were able to scale really quickly. So I do think that paths like taking a coding boot camp or finding ways to do micro-credentialing, if you're interested in the technical side of things, there's a lot of opportunities there. And then once you get into a lot of these early stage companies, they're fighting for their life and growing like crazy, and they just want to find good people who can help them build the company. They're not going to be looking over your resume to see you did all these different things. They want to get you in and start testing you right away. And if you have the skill set that fits with what they're trying to do, there's tremendous opportunities there. And then on the non-technical side, again, a lot of it is just, are you ready to come in and match the pace of the company? They're really messy. They move quickly. If you can find a way to add value, and I love this idea that there's really kind of two ways in startups, honestly in any company, but in startups in particular, that you can separate yourself and really add a ton of value. One's called being the janitor, and you just come in and take on all the stuff that nobody else wants to do, and you live and breathe doing that type of thing, and it really adds a ton of value to the rest of the team. And the second is being a star, and you take on tasks that are really challenging or that other people can't do, or you look ahead into what are areas that we need to move into from a sales perspective. Like we had one of our top applicants that joined Grow. They showed up with a list of the potential customers that we should be reaching out to and contact information for all of them as well. And this was somebody who never had a sales role and was not in the financial or the technology space prior to it. A lot of it is just that ability to roll up your sleeves and work hard, because there's so many opportunities once you get in with these startups to add value and continue growing there. So I think I rambled in a bit of the wrong direction, but I hope that added a bit of kind of context and to the view that startups take when looking on bringing on different people.
Yeah, and I think that's what we wanted to touch on as well, is that different environment in startups that you've kind of highlighted. And I think that one of the things we did want to talk about was the Indigenous participation in startups and in that ecosystem, and maybe ways in which it can grow and Indigenous people can be supported. So I'll maybe go back to you, Tavia, on this topic of startups and even how an entity like SIIT may enable some of that participation. Any of your thoughts on that world? Is it are startup companies a natural employer of some of your students, and how do you think that that's going to evolve over the next few years?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think Indigenous people are naturally entrepreneurial. So I think that it's in us, that it's innate, and that we're certainly positioned well. When I was kind of listening to some of the other discussion, I think about networks and how critical networking and relationship building is in this sector, especially around startups and innovation, and really how do we ensure that Indigenous people are being connected in those networks? How do we access those networks? So I think there's some work to be done there. So even if we are the greatest entrepreneurs and we have some great ideas and practice that has seen some success, how do we make sure we're connected? And when I think about what we do in post-secondary, one of the most important pieces that I can ensure that our programs have is that connection to work integrated learning. So whether they're really short courses or diploma 2-year courses, making sure that we're really well connected to industry. And that includes, startup industry, small businesses, to expose our students to that industry, but also to give our students that work integrated learning. So opportunities to work with those companies and vice versa, exposing those companies to our Indigenous learners.
Yeah, that's great. And I think just on this whole topic of startups and the different types of employment and skills, the different type of environment in a startup, maybe I'll go to you, Tina, in your former role as that dual role, Minister for Innovation Sask, when a lot of this, I think, was starting up in the startup space over the last 5 years, but also being Minister at Advanced Ed. What are sort of your views on that startup world as it relates to skills and education, and what are some of either the initiatives you were part of or your vision for the future and how this may all come together, and maybe with that ag lens as well?
Yeah, so I think we've worked really hard but there's still so much more to do to have, I think, a truly inclusive startup space. That's the first challenge. It does tend to be heavily, Caucasian male dominated, and so we have some work to do to increase the number of women who are involved in this space, and also the number of Indigenous people who are involved in this space. I think the number of women is increasing. I think right now Cultivator has, I think, 50% founders who are female, but we still have quite a ways to go with respect to the inclusion of Indigenous people. And I would say that, part of that is the network question that Tavia spoke to. And for that reason, I'm really proud of the relationship that we've built with FHQ here at Economic Development Regina. And we certainly have Indigenous representation on the Council for Entrepreneurship Growth. But part of that also comes from just the access points that we're missing in the high school spaces. And so we know that a lot of urban wealthier schools have business clubs, but those certainly are not available across all of our communities, and particularly even in some of our Indigenous communities. And that's one of the places where young people start to get the idea that they want to be entrepreneurs. So that's the first thing. The second thing on the skills piece, I think organizations like FHQ are doing a great job with Plato software testing in terms of building a really practical skill base for a lot of tech that is needed out there right now. And I know that they can't actually keep up the number of employees and people who are software testers. And so for anyone who might be watching this, there's a real need for software testers, and Plato has some training systems in place to get you connected to that. And then the final thing would be access to capital. We know that women notoriously have difficulty accessing venture capital capital in order to not just, they can start up their business, but then being able to grow it is a challenge because they can't access capital. That's magnified for our Indigenous community who doesn't have the networks that Tavia spoke to earlier. And so I think we really need to do some work as a community to always be mindful about how our personal biases may be indirectly and unconsciously eliminating other groups from being able to access opportunities for growth and expansion in our communities.
Yeah, really good comments. And I thought I'd go back to Sean. I'm thinking through all the discussion here. And Sean, you had mentioned some of those coding boot camps, some of the easier paths maybe from training to employment. But I'll go back to you just with a question, thinking about, some of the people possibly listening, if they were interested in working at a startup, getting a job in a startup, and one of the ones you fund or one of the ones in the network, what's the practical way that they do that? Is it reaching out to somebody at a company? Is it going to a networking event? What is sort of a practical way to get in and just find a way to I guess break through and have some of those employment opportunities?
Yeah, in terms of how we can get more people involved with startups and with technology companies. I had some reflecting that I was doing leading up to this, and a few conversations with Annie saying, "Look, I feel like an imposter being on this panel next to two people like Tavia and Tina that have done so much already, and I'm still very much starting this journey." I had this view that we've got this great industry that's super approachable and anyone can enter it, and spent a lot of time talking with a whole bunch of founders around the province and people who I admire and respect. I think I had a similar lens there, and really seeing just how poor the results have been in creating a strong link between the technology space and the Indigenous space. So I'd say that I'm very early into my journey and hope to be held accountable with measurable impacts in the future. That being said, I do believe that we all have the intention of creating a really strong connection. I think we're really open. I could say, personally, if there's anyone interested, I'd hope that they feel comfortable reaching out and contacting me, and I'll absolutely reach out back to them. And there's lots of different ways you can get involved as well. Through Cultivator, whether that's trying to get involved to understand the programming they have there, getting involved with the events they have. They have the SaaS Startup Summit in the beginning of September, and they've got lots of great events that go on throughout the year. Collabs in Saskatoon puts on a lot of events that it feels like the events are largely centered around how to be a great founder, or here's all the great companies that we want to present, and there's judges that come in and say who the best companies are. Really, the intention there is just to create a sense of community around the startup space and to have kind of cool topics to discover. And now, as we're hopefully all getting back in person in the coming months, really getting people talking with each other and creating connections there. So I'd say, through Cultivator, through reaching out to Jordan, who runs Cultivator, myself, who runs Conexus Venture Capital, I think we're eager to make a difference. We're eager to find ways where we can get more involved. And certainly when it comes to our portfolio founders, I know they're echoing the same remarks as well. So I'd say if there's interest in working in that space, I'd be happy to talk to anyone and see if I can help put them in touch with the right people to see if there's opportunities in the tech space, either directly as a technology worker and all the other roles, because there's so many roles that are required to really help these companies be successful.
And maybe just following up on that conversation around some of those barriers that exist, maybe I'll go back to you, Tavia, both maybe some perspective on what barriers that Indigenous folks do face in trying to access employment in places like that, but then also what is a group like SIIT or some of the other post-secondary institutions, what are some of the supports that you have, and even your approach you have to engaging with the companies or being those connectors between students and companies? Maybe just some follow-up on that from you, Tavia.
Sure. One of the places that I like to start from is actually within the program or the curriculum itself. So I think one of the biggest barriers that I see is there's not a reflection of the Indigenous experience, the history of Indigenous people, our culture, our language, our values within the programs and the curriculum that we're presented with when we go to post-secondary institutions. So one of the most important pieces I think that we do at SIIT, but it's certainly something that can be done at any institution, is making sure that we kind of start with that piece. Like, what is the Indigenous experience in agriculture? What is our connection to land? We are, often seen as stewards, environmental stewards of the land, and or if it's even value add or egg processing, certainly we're experienced with traditionally pemmican making or picking berries and having them dried to make sure that they'll see us through the winter. So these are not foreign concepts to us. These are traditional ways in which we've been able to sustain our communities here within Canada and Western Canada. So making sure that we kind of start from this is not foreign to us. This is actually a part of who we are. And then, there's a number of other barriers that both within SIIT as well as, First Nations communities and other support networks have provided. So oftentimes you'll find Indigenous learners tend to be older, often will have a number of dependents, perhaps are single parents. So really critical is access to good daycare. Many of our First Nations communities have daycare sites, and often they prioritize post-secondary students to access those sites. Transportation. I was the president of Northwest College for about 5 years, and every morning I would see, 5 First Nations communities have buses that would show up outside the college, and they would be commuting community members on reserve into the college in North Battleford. And there is just no way that the programs at Northwest would be successful without that transportation piece. So to me, that was one of the most critical pieces to the success of programming there at Northwest. And then the other piece is just the cohort support. So we often see First Nations people have greater success when they're surrounded by a cohort, other people like them, whether they see themselves within the faculty, but also within the students that they will be, going on the education path with. So I think that those are a few pieces. SIIT has 9 career centers strategically placed across the province to really ensure that that transition from education into employment is supported and successful. So that's a really important piece that SIIT invests in that's, I think, quite unique compared to other institutions.
Yeah, great comments. And I think when you mentioned that land stewardship piece, I think as Sean and a number of these companies get going, it's there's just a ton of traditional knowledge that exists out in communities with major land areas that they're overseeing, and again, as you mentioned, being stewards of. And I think that there's probably some interesting opportunities that folks haven't even thought of in terms of that level of engagement with communities themselves and some of the knowledge keepers there. So we've had a good discussion on some of these supports and things, but maybe just closing off that topic and that discussion. Anything else? Maybe I'll start with yourself, Tina. If we think about some of the folks looking to, be involved in the future of ag, the future of ag innovation here in Saskatchewan, is there anything, whether through EDR or some of your partnerships, any supports that they could look to be able to get involved? I'll just kind of turn it over to you.
Yeah, as I said before, we have a pretty great relationship with FHQ. But I would also say that there's a great example in Conexus. They have 4C Farms cattle. And I think this year I saw somewhere they plan to farm 5,000 acres, wheat, barley, canola. So there's some examples out there of Indigenous communities that are already working on this. And I guess I would say that, there's this sort of view that ag is unimportant, but I guess I put out there that, the global population is going to outstrip the available land by 2050, which means we're going to have a global hunger problem. And so getting involved in agriculture will help us feed the world with safe reliable, sustainable food without exploiting the land and environmentally degrading it even more. And so there's really, I think, a moral obligation, just to go back to Tavia's comments about being stewards of the land. I think we all have a bit of an obligation to do things better, and in a more productive way. And that's, I think, one of the real attractions of being involved in ag and in ag tech at this particular time. And I really think that Indigenous communities have a lot to offer Westerners, quite frankly, or settlers, about how to revisit that relationship with the land in meaningful ways.
Great. And maybe just, I guess it's following up on a lot of what you've talked about, Tavia, with SIIT, but just practically, if folks wanted to take advantage of some of your programming, some of the supports that you have, whether it's directly through programming or through other events and things, what are some of the ways that they can do that?
From an industry perspective, a couple of thoughts. Most of our programs have industry engagement in them. So that's a really great way to introduce yourself, get a sense of who we are, what our programs look like, what our students look like. So there'd be opportunities through that. And you can connect through SIIT's website, SIIT.ca, as well as the 9 career centers that I talked about. They're incredibly knowledgeable. They have each year 5,000-6,000 clients go through their doors, job seekers looking to attach themselves to the labor market. So they have a really close connections within their communities to the local labor market and industry. And hopefully many of the employers listening today are already connected to those career centers. And then, of course, there's opportunities around scholarships and other ways to connect projects within our programs that are practical and integrate work into the program. So I would encourage you to make that connection through our website, and certainly myself as well.
Great. And then maybe I'll kick it over to you, Sean, with maybe some of the non-traditional training and things you've talked about. If somebody was listening to this and they were interested in a coding boot camp or in what Cultivator is, any comments on some of those supports and just tactically, how do you access them?
I'd just say, find a way to kick down the door and get involved in the space. Feel free to reach out to myself or Kyle or Evan or Rand or anyone on the Conexus Venture Capital team or the team at Cultivator. Like, I certainly think that ag tech in Canada is really exciting right now. Like, we have the 7th most arable land in the world. We're a country of innovators. It's a space that we naturally should be a leader in. And this is also one of the next big waves of innovation that's happening that doesn't belong on kind of Bay Street and moving itself outwards. We've had lots of waves in Canada around fintech and artificial intelligence and mobile that naturally had to start in the Torontos and Montreals and Vancouvers. Ag tech is something that belongs here in Saskatchewan. This is the place that should be the hub for all of ag tech in Canada. And I think that if it's an area that interests you, just find as many people in the space and in the industry that are willing to talk to you about what it is that's needed to be done, what jobs they have open today, and what skills you may need if you're looking to come in at different levels within the company. So I would say don't be shy. Reach out. We'd love to talk with anyone who's interested in the space, and certainly want to find greater ways to collaborate going forward and bring more people into the space.
Great. So I think we're sort of through a lot of our discussion topics here, but I think, again, circling back to some of our goals as a panel, try to highlight some of how ag tech and the future of ag is going to be a little bit different. What are some of the training, skills, education perspectives and different models that are going to be happening in the years to come? I'll just maybe do a roundtable on closing thoughts. So I'll maybe start with you, Tavia. Any kind of closing thoughts from the panel, takeaways, and next step advice for folks?
I think one of the things that really brought me here to participate today was the notion of nothing about us without us. And so I really appreciate the fact that, much of this is led by FHQ, as it should be. really, and if we're going to want to have true Indigenous engagement, then it really needs to be included and particularly led by Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. So I just want to do a shout out to them for that, and really holding up to that sentiment throughout over the couple of days of the event. So thank you.
And how about closing thoughts from yourself, Sean?
I just want to thank FHQ for putting this on and for inviting me to be a part of this. As mentioned earlier, I felt a little bit uncomfortable in talking with Annie at the start about what truly can I bring to the table, and I'm really excited about where we're going with ag tech, and I hope that I can be a significant part of the solution in making sure that this big opportunity we have for Saskatchewan is for everyone in Saskatchewan, and that we can really bring on some of our key partners in the Indigenous space to get more founders funded and more employees at all these companies.
Great. And last, over to you. Closing thoughts from you, Tina.
Well, I would echo Sean's comments about being excited about it. This is an area that is growing. We saw through COVID how important it is to have safe, reliable, sustainable food chains. So this is an industry and a movement that's not going away anytime soon. And the career path is relatively well paying and a growth area. And so I would just encourage people to be audacious. To join the Audacity movement, which is about, shooting for the stars and having really bold goals, and jump in and reach out and get involved and find out more. And we would love to have more people getting involved in this space and putting Saskatchewan on the map.
Excellent, great. No, I echo everyone's sentiments. I want to thank the team at FHQ Developments for inviting myself, Annie, who's leading the conference, and Thomas and the entire team. I think it's been a good panel today. I think some of the takeaways from the discussions is, and I think, Sean, you put it best, just try to kick that door down. But I think for some of the Indigenous folks, whether it's working through the group at FHQ, working through folks like Tavia, folks like First Nations University, somebody like Tina at EDR, I mean, EDR's role is an enabler. So anyone in Southern Saskatchewan visiting the folks at EDR, just to learn about what's going on in agriculture and in ag tech, I think hopefully there's a lot of supports, and hopefully it's a welcoming environment for some of the Indigenous people that are hopefully listening and learning a little bit about what we've talked about today. So I think with that, we'll wrap up and wish everyone the best with the rest of the conference. And again, I think all three of the folks on our panel certainly invited you to bother them with any questions and follow up with them directly. And I'd say the same with myself. So I want to thank everyone on the panel, and all the best.